So we are the guys that are keeping you from drinks and finger food, okay? We'll try to make this as entertaining as possible. Hopefully you guys are going to come to the Spy Museum after this. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go to this museum, but it's pretty cool. We've run a couple of events there before, and it was awesome. So if you haven't been there, take an opportunity to go. My name is Schuller. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Radiant Logic. And for the next 25 minutes, our panelists are going to share their experiences with what we are now calling a Federated Identity Service. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Radiant, I'll take a step and just give you guys a quick 30-second education before I turn it over to the panel. We started back in the year 2000 as what we called a virtual directory. And over time, what we've learned in order to solve the problem that we solve, which is to bring together all of the data around identity for all of the different things that you want to do with it. Virtual directory wasn't enough, right? We learned over time that you need the combination of virtual directory, which is a way to kind of proxy to back-end systems, meta directory, which is a way to sync and do ETL into a central directory, and then the directory itself. But what we've seen in our existence is that the value that our customers see in what we do is that they have an opportunity to eliminate integration as the critical path roadblock to every single project by having this toolkit and by being able to centralize identity so that anything that comes in the door that needs to consume identity for authentication or authorization purposes or even experience purposes has one place to go. They get everything that they need, the right protocol, the right structure, the right schema, with the right data. So with that, I'm going to introduce Davis Arora. Davis is the Cybersecurity Director at Honeywell, and he's going to share his experiences and how he has already changed the game at Honeywell and what he's planning to do in the future at Honeywell in order to change the game even more. Followed by Todd Oxford, who's the Senior Security Director at Equifax. They're each going to take about 10 minutes and just kind of go through and share their experience, tell you what they've done and what they're planning on doing, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and we'll all end in about 25 minutes. Davis?
Sounds good. Thanks, dear. So usually I start with a cartwheel or something, or ninja stance or something like that, but I won't do that today because I know we're pressed for time. So I'll just jump into it. What do we do? Oh, there we go. So the only thing you need to remember is identity is core, right? I think that's a key to anyone you talk to, anywhere you go, within your organization or not. That's the key message, so I'm always repeating that constantly. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about what Honeywell does. I think a lot of people see the Honeywell logo. You guys know we have thermostats, water leak detectors and things like that. But some of the cool stats around Honeywell is a Fortune 100 company, about $42 billion in revenue. 110,000 employees, but I manage approximately 180,000 identities and about 700,000 customers. That's only a subset of the customers. I only do that side. Some of the cool stats around Honeywell, and I'll just quickly go through them. I mean, every 5 seconds, there's an aircraft landing somewhere in the world that has Honeywell braking systems in them. We have so 80% of the satellites in orbit actually have Honeywell products in them, which is pretty cool. 10 million buildings around the world have Honeywell connected products in them as well. We create location devices and products, protective products for first responders when there's hazardous issues that come up. So I'll keep going. So a little bit about my service. So I manage the enterprise, like I said, 170,000 users and about 700,000 customers. It's the full gamut of identity access management. When we start to look at this, if we start with directory services, it's a hodgepodge, right? It's grown as the years have grown, right? We have Active Directory in place. We have LDAP for authentication in place, the old Novell EDR stuff. We have Azure Active Directory, and we do some synchronization that occurs. We have a cloud agnostic directory, like a DMZ environment that's in place as well. And so we do about 5 million logins per month, I should say. And I'll just continue on. So when we move into identity governance and administration. So this is like the most customer-facing, UI experience that you have. We do about 50,000 requests per month. About 80% of those are automated. 94% of them are self-serve. And we average a customer satisfaction, I'm proud of this, customer satisfaction about 88% across the organization. As we move into certificate services, so this applies to both device and user-based certificates for any managed device within the network. We do network segmentation, so we provide the MSPKI certificates for that. We also do secure email through SMIME encryption. As we move into single sign-on, another fairly mature service. We have it deployed to about 1,500 applications across the enterprise. We've managed to do some good things in terms of integrating with PC login with Kerberos. So we're minimizing a lot of the credential fatigue that you would see with constantly being asked for credentials. We've also federated with social and non-social identities. So we've done some good work there. From the customer perspective, for some of the applications that leverage the enterprise SSO service, the 700 users that leverage it, 700,000 users that leverage it, we're doing some external user profile management. So this is where, I think you had mentioned it earlier, right? When you're talking about customer identities, the whole notion of identity proofing and verification, all that changes, right? The dynamic changes. You can't ask them as much. So I have found that my team has done a good job of kind of balancing, right, internal versus external from that perspective. We also do some privilege access management across the organization, about 110,000 workstations that we manage administrative controls for. We also do about 15,000 servers across the organization. We do a combination of cloud-based privilege access management as well as on-prem stuff. Then we jump into kind of the last thing. It's kind of in the background. It's our traditional login monitoring. It's behavior analytics. We leverage that heavily for password lockout type functionality, right? We give dashboards to our service desk people, and so they can access those data points to figure out, hey, why is this person being locked out? What's happening? And if it's malicious, then they act on that. If it's not malicious, then they help the user kind of get through the process. So I'll keep going. So this is one of the slides that I generally present to more of the executive leadership. It's kind of in a poster format, and just basically depicts the fact that identity is core to the organization, right? Gives some of the metrics that we drive, and I also like to just reiterate the fact that a lot of these things that I'm doing right now, they're all based on the enterprise, very heavily focused on the enterprise, and therefore anything that I do moving forward now, I've learned that you got to be agile to drive innovation, as well as the fact that you got to make sure that you're demoing, demo, right? And so I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but one of the things that we managed doing is explicitly with Radiant Logic is that I had the opportunity with 2 divestitures that were leaving Honeywell. So I managed, so the ask that I got from our CSOs was, how would you build identity for these organizations and do it that way? So what I did is I picked best of breed across the board. We did a ton of POCs. We had use cases defined, we had requirements defined, and we ended up deploying. So we've successfully deployed an entire identity stack to 2 companies, and they've been out there for about 8 months now. And I got to tell you guys, haven't heard any complaints. Still got my job, so I think it's been working really well. As we jump into this slide here, and I'm doing this really fast mode, so I mean, you guys feel free to interrupt or ask questions if you like. But here's the journey, right? Here's where we're headed, right? This is just one of the things that we have to do. And don't be too focused on the timelines, because you guys know how it is. Once you get to executive leadership and you prove the point to them that here there's value, identity is core, this is why we're doing the things that we're doing, and here's the impact to the end user, sometimes they change their mind, right? So the dates continue to change as we go. But you can see just in Basecamp 1, right? The ideology that I have today is the fact that I've been doing identity access management for the organization for quite some time. So my team are the guys that have the knowledge and have the capability to deploy products and solutions well for the organization The organization is happy with it. But what I see coming is the blurring of lines between customer identity access management and enterprise identity access management. And as those lines start to blur, and you guys know, you guys have been here, right? We have a talent gap in terms of mature identity technologists, evangelists, architects, whatever you want to call them, right? And so because of that, I'm seeing this tidal wave coming. And as this tidal wave comes, I feel like I have to get my house in order, right? I was great, you know, when it's managing 200,000 internal users, maybe 700,000, but once we start getting into the millions, right, that whole demographic changes. And so, you know, one thing that I opted to do was leverage something like a virtual directory service to fix some of the legacy directories that I have in place today, like an LDAP directory service, right? Because I'm looking for that scalability, that performance, and that availability as I move forward on this journey. So I'll stop there, Dieter. Good.
Questions? At the end, though.
Why don't you take over and we'll
There you go,
take
Todd.
questions at the end.
Yeah.
So as Dieter mentioned, my name is Todd Oxford. I work for Equifax. I would query the audience and ask you what Equifax does, but I'll just go ahead and tell you, because usually you tell me that we monitor credit scores and we produce credit score numbers. We're a data sciences company, first and foremost. So this is a direct quote from our president of IT. We are moving to the cloud. We are moving to the Google Suite. We are moving to GCP for all future application development, et cetera. So in the security world, how do we get behind this, right? How do we support this IT initiative? So we call it the Equifax 2020 digital transformation. So in our world, this is how we got there from access management standpoint. I'm responsible for access management directory services. My esteemed colleague in the cloud is responsible for privilege, identity, and key management. So I joined Equifax in the latter part of 2018. One of the first tasks I was given was to MFA enable all remote access into the Equifax network for US associates. Sometime in the December-January timeframe, we realized the entire globe, except for Australia, comes back to the United States. So our scope went from a few thousand users in the US that we had identified clearly, did targeted marketing campaigns, et cetera, to now over 10,000 users globally across the world that we now had to communicate to in multi-language. So if I ask you, is email an effective form of communication for a global company, would you say yes? Exactly, no. So we used senior leadership sponsorships, we used workday campaigns, we used banners on corporate intranet sites, targeted email marketing, et cetera, to get the message out. The message was really clear. Our previous form of remote access into our network was no longer accessible, right, or acceptable. We were going to enable MFA. We went through a vendor selection process. We went with the Ping suite of products. Now we had to figure out, how am I going to commercialize that? So the first thing we do, right, in the MFA world, there's multiple forms of MFA you can go with. I can use a soft token on a phone. I can use a desktop app. I can use keys, right? To try to control cost, we tried to influence users to go down the smartphone app route. At that point, it's really not a cost for me, right? Because I only own user licenses. I don't really pay for the phone that you're going to use to authenticate with. Given all that, I had about a 50% acceptance rate on the use of the phone. What really happens is when you send a survey out around Christmas time, people pretty much tend to ignore it. So starting again in December, at the latter part of December, we used workday campaigns to communicate to our end users the fact that we really need you to go ahead and select what you're going to use for your multi-factor device, so I can go ahead and physically order hard tokens so I can distribute those globally. So that was challenging. So started that at the end of December, wrapped that up at the end of January. Finally got about a 70% acceptance rate. In the middle of all this, you have to figure out, when a user calls your help desk, how do you identify that user? So thoughts? Typically you use KBAs or something along those lines, right? You could ask other identifying information to identify who that user is that's calling the help desk, asking to register and use an MFA device. So at that point in time, we had about 20% of our user base using KBAs. We use another communication campaign similar to the enrollment process to pretty much force users to answer KBAs. So we got through all of that, started to roll out the service to our end user base. And the greatest thing about these projects is have very clear end dates in mind. Right? In any identity and access management project, you have a scope, you have an initiative, you think you have an end goal, right? You never have an end goal, right? There's always something else going on in the identity and access world. In our state, we had a hard date, right? It was basically customer mandated to enable remote access with MFA by end of February. So we started communicating that date very clearly to our end user community. On February 28th, MFA is going live, right? Whether you like it or not. We were a little nice with it because we only MFA enabled those users who actually had an MFA device. If you didn't have an MFA device, I continued to allow you to do what you used to do. Then it's at a certain point, once the senior leadership team bought into it, we created a hard date. That hard date was March 16th. As of March 16th, if you weren't enrolled in MFA, you didn't access the network, period. So having buy-in from senior leadership to have that kind of control around your enterprise is key to a successful project that we used right at Equifax. Next step, certificate checking. I've got to be able to identify devices in all this world. My easy form of doing that is with certificates. Creating separate policy for cloud components. In the world of Google, as you guys that are familiar with Google know, they support one IDP. Right? We have to come up with clever ways to creating policies so I create my G Suite users are treated differently than my GCP users. And then our end state that I'll talk about next year at Identiverse is where do we get to for our end goal? Where are we with passwordless? Where are we with bringing your own device? Today, neither one of those are an acceptable form, right, of access at Equifax. So this is my little honeycomb slide I like to use. So just talking about general things that we do in the virtual directory access management world. So obviously migrating users from one form of application to another, building a solution that's highly available. So on June 13th, us being new to the environment, went through our first disaster recovery test. Full blown in the middle of the day, shut down your entire application in one data center and your transactions better work in the other data center. So 100% success rate, no downtime whatsoever in that scenario. Seamless access. My users do not need to know what my backend looks like. They don't need to care about what data center I'm running in. I'm running a global environment. I run it out of multiple data centers, hybrid cloud, completely seamless to my end user community. Multi-factor authentication and self-service. Self-service in my world is the ability to register multi-factor devices on your own behalf, right? We build an internal portal. User can go to that portal, register any form of acceptable devices that we allow. And then from that self-service portal, we do all kinds of back-end notifications to make sure someone's not doing what they shouldn't be doing. Directory segmentation. We specifically built views using a virtual directory to only allow certain applications, in this case Ping, to view the data that they needed to access. So I'll get into this slide specifically around how and where would the virtual directory be beneficial in an integration with Ping. So in the middle of our rollout at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you think about it from a security team perspective, you have a set of pilot users, right? You have a certain test bed that you go through numerous times to validate that your solution is going to be effective for the enterprise. You don't have the type of user that exists globally. There are so many variations of a user ID with an Active Directory, you'll never account for them all. At 2 o'clock in the morning, we started getting users calling in from around the globe that they could not authenticate. Now, why couldn't these users authenticate? We couldn't figure it out. This started at 11 o'clock. 2 o'clock in the morning, one of the guys on the team realized these users are all on the same OU. This OU has a slash in it. So what do you do in that scenario to fix that problem? There's nothing you can do from the application standpoint. It's doing an LDAP call. The fact that it can't account for an OU that it won't recognize, there's nothing you can do in the application to fix it. So in the identity management world, what do? You identify the applications that are using that OU. You reach out to the application owner, you do a change request, you rename the thing. In the virtual directory world, you go into the virtual view and you account for that slash and immediately you've resolved your problem. So robust caching, I'll talk about that. In the Windows world, right, you could be site aware. Our environment is 100% Linux based. I never realized back in 2003 when I commercialized Linux for another company that Linux would be where it is today. But where it is today in our world is more secure than going with a Windows-based technology. When you do that, you're not site aware. When you're a global company, your authentications may end up anywhere in the world. That may impact your end user base. What you would think is sub-second response time for authentication may be multi-seconds, maybe 30, 40 seconds, maybe as long as 3 minutes. You can't account for that unless you can cache or you can determine where exactly that user authentication is happening from. Radiant Logic helps us solve that problem. Schema dependency. For all these applications that I have, typically you have a service account. The service account has the ability to search across the entire schema, right? Pick out the entitlements and the attributes that it needs to authenticate the user. By building specific views for specific applications, we're able to increase response time or decrease response time and improve performance for applications. This is my busy slide, so I'll kind of just talk through the circle for the sake of time. So for our project, first thing was communication, right? Identify our target audience, build very effective forms of communication with emails, slides, graphs, whatever it took. Target my users on an enrollment basis. So we were tracking enrollment activity daily. Our targeted number was somewhere around 12,500 users. So we tracked that, then we started doing, initially we would do global communications by a country, and then we got to the point where we only targeted those individuals who hadn't enrolled. Build a very effective form of registration, as seamless as you can make it. We used Kerberos for all of our authentication. Didn't want users complaining about password management, etc. So we just Kerberos enabled your access into that self-service portal. Once the user is authenticated in our seamless MFA-enabled world, we use, of course, those session tokens to single sign on you across multiple applications. And at the end of the day, the users don't know. So my last slide, how do we do it? It's all about getting buy-in from senior leadership first, right? You obviously have to get the top guys in the company on board with what you're doing. So when I first started this project, I got numerous calls from my peers and of course my SVP that the other leaders of the company didn't know this was coming. Now, why didn't they know this was coming? Because when we built our very first communication, we specifically filtered out the presidents and senior vice presidents of the company. We targeted everybody else. That was our end state goal, right? Always protect your senior leaderships and go after the general mass audience. Once we realized they didn't have any visibility in what this project was doing, we started doing direct communication to senior leadership, getting them on board with the dates, when this was coming, what the impact was going to be to their business units. With any solution, we ran through your typical pen testing, your Fortify scans, making sure our solution was very secure. Of course, in the middle of all this, communication amongst the team is key. So some of the things that we were doing as a team to test would cause us to fail pen tests, etc. Once we resolved all that, we were pretty much given the green light to go ahead and go into production and roll this solution out globally. Early wins and metrics. Obviously, the easiest way of communicating this was the number of users that were effectively authenticating on a daily basis. We had some problems early on. Most of those problems were probably network or switch related. Once we've resolved those, we've been pretty much 100% stable since middle of March. So no downtime, no issues whatsoever to speak of. Empathy. Empathy, my slide. I think the key to our project was having very specific dates in mind. So we didn't either change scope, fall out of scope. One of the biggest things we did as part of this project was replace a legacy solution. That legacy solution had a specific renewal date, and we drove toward that renewal date. I think a lot of a large audience at Equifax didn't realize we were going to hit that date, so there might have been some doubt. But the reality was we did hit the date on the very last day of the contract renewal. So that was a big win for us as well. So any questions?
So we're not going to have a lot of time for Q&A, but there's a couple of things that I just wanted to kind of bring to the forefront. One of the things that we see consistently when you have an application that has certain expectations and a series of backends that act differently is one of the two must change in order for you to be successful. All right, so architects get this right away because they look at this and they go, hey, this is a loosely coupled architecture. This buys me the same thing that VMware bought me when it came to my hardware and operating system investments, right? I can take a Linux box and make it look like a Windows box. I can take a big box and make it look like lots of smaller boxes, right? So take those concepts and imagine applying them to identity data, right? I can make an Active Directory look like a Sun directory. I can take 3 different directories, make it look like one directory, right? I can take something that just gives me LDAP and provide a developer a REST-based interface because the developer's under 30 and they don't want to deal with LDAP. Right? And the list goes on and on. So from an architect perspective, right, like the light bulb goes off, and then you have to talk to management and you have to talk to the stakeholders, and they look at it and they just don't understand it. And so one of the things that I'd like you guys to kind of finish off on is how do you talk about the value of a virtual directory or a federated identity service to the stakeholders and to the management team so that they understand what it's going to buy them, not necessarily what it does. Thoughts?
You can go first.
No, I go.
Oh, I'm already mic'd up. So I'm laughing about that as you talk about being under 30 because I got Java certified in 1999. No one thought Java was going to be a viable
so you
product.
Qualify.
All your COBOL RPG developers laughed. I remember when SOAP was the big thing. No one knew what a REST API was. So the benefit of Radiant Logic, when you have a core team, you have to know what your development base is. So what we've developed in the access management world is an onboarding form. Right, so I have a phenomenal team that works directly with the application developers, knows kind of what their skill sets are, and can then work with the directory services team to build the view they need to give that application team exactly what they need with minimal effort. Given that, it's pretty much wide open. If you can't control the application access, the application views, you may be looking at weeks rather than days to onboard a solution.
Yeah, the application onboarding has seemed to be a big thing that, like, when you start talking to people about how long does it take us today to get a new application so that users are authenticating and that they're getting access to the right parts of the application, right? How long could that take, or should that take, right, for a new application to do? That seems to get people's attention.
Yeah.
Davis, I don't know if there's anything you want to
Yeah, I mean, it's the value statement around common processes, common platforms, right? And the ability for all these legacy applications to adopt the enterprise directory service, right? At the end of the day, you want them to leverage a managed identity, right? So I always call it one Honeywell identity. And I get application owners that come to me all the time that say, I don't know how this app was developed. That guy's long gone, right? I don't know how it integrates with things. I have no idea what database it's using where. And so this creates that bridge for me, right? This gets me to a point where now they can leverage my one Honeywell identity, and now I can control, right, and manage them appropriately.
Yeah, let me give you a very specific example on that. In our world, we have more than 75 Active Directory domains across the globe. Some of our applications have entitlements in one directory and user IDs in another directory. Yes. Now, I can handle that in the SAML world, right? I can pass entitlements out of this repository into the other. What I can't handle is when the user IDs are the same or different, right? So in the virtual directory world, that's really easy to do with an interceptor script and build that view of just disparate, right? And I don't worry about it. Before we had the virtual directory, you're talking 3 to 5 weeks to resolve that solution. Virtual directory world, 1-day turnaround.
Yeah, that's a great example. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We will be here for a while if you guys have specific questions that you want to ask. Otherwise, we appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.